Okay, so we're going to talk about debugging now. So it's not really like Python today. It's more like if you run into an error, how do you fix it? And if you also run into an unexpected output, how do you fix those? Okay, so some announcements today. Homework 3 was due today, and homework 4 has been released. And it'll be due next week. So only homework 3 was the one where you had a 2-week, you had 2 weeks to do it. But homework 4 and onwards should just be 1 week. So it'll be due next Wednesday. Also, my office hour has been moved to 3 to 4 p.m. on Wednesdays instead of 2 to 3. And they'll be in Campbell 501B. So sorry for the inconvenience, but I had to move it. Any questions before we get started? Yeah. We won't take attendance today. Okay. So we'll talk about bugs and how to fix them. Oh no, I have to do this now. Okay, so we're gonna do something a little bit different today, and we're gonna use Slido. So please scan this QR code or join using this number. If for some reason you can't join because the Wi-Fi and whatnot, like that's perfectly fine. But those of you that can join, please join. So basically what we're gonna do here is I'm gonna have like 2 questions and you guys will like answer based on what you think is true. Doesn't matter if it's right or wrong, just whatever you guys think right now. Because we'll talk about it later in the lecture. And it's all anonymous. So I won't know who says what or who picked what. And your peers don't know either. So just pick to your best ability. Okay. So this is our first question. I put some code at the top and then it gave some error. So for the question, I want you guys to pick which error you think, what kind of error you think this is, just based off of the picture. And if you're not sure, it's perfectly fine. You can guess. Like, can you guys see the question on the poll? No? Oh no. What? Okay, let me see. It's a poll. Yeah, it's supposed to automatically come up. So give me a second. Mm. Oh no. Okay, sorry guys, it's not working. So maybe think about this, and if anyone has any ideas, you can raise your hand. Yeah. So if we look at the error itself, it says index error and list index out of range. So the type of error this is an index error. That's like the name of the error. And then does anyone have any idea like what this means? List index out of range?
It starts at 0 and goes from 0 to 1 to 2, so it doesn't have a 3.
Yeah. So if we look here, I made a list and there are 3 items, but with lists or like basically anything in Python, we start at 0. So the indices of these are 0, 1, 2. So when I index into the list using 3, there is no third position. So that's why we get this index error saying the list index is out of range, because the indices go from 0 to 2 and I try to index at 3. There's nothing at 3. Okay. Oh, I guess it works now. So I think this one might work. Okay, this is our second question. So this is I picked this one in Jupyter Notebook just so you guys could see there's like a slight difference. I think it's easier to read here than in your terminal. So I made some function, and then when I ran the cell, it says this unexpected EOF while parsing. And I want you guys to say how you would fix this. So I think it should work. Can you guys let me know if you guys see it? Don't see it? Or maybe scan the QR code again or something. You guys able to see it? Yeah, so I guess you have to scan the QR code again. Sorry, guys. Oh, and then uh let me grab the QR code actually. Okay, here's the QR code. Also, if you're not sure how you would fix it, that's like perfectly fine too. Okay, so these are some of the things you guys put, and then the one in the middle is the one that most people put. So pretty much everyone said to put a parenthesis or close a parenthesis at the end. And that's exactly what you should do. Basically, whenever you see it's a syntax error, you most likely either like missed a colon or parenthesis, like the way you wrote it, like you're missing something. So like in this case, unexpected UF while parsing, that usually just means you're missing like a comma, a quotation, a parenthesis, anything like that. And a note, sometimes it might be because I didn't have anything else after this, but if you have multiple lines and the syntax error, like it's on this line, sometimes it'll tell you it's on the following line. So just keep that in mind. So always like just check for the lines surrounding the lines to make sure, because sometimes it'll tell you it's in the following line. Just be mindful of that. All right. Okay, so this is a traceback message. This is basically what you'll see if you're using VS Code to do your homework. And you'll see a similar variation in Jupyter Notebook, just like the picture I put before. So it'll tell you the file name. I should do this on here. It'll tell you the file name. In this case, it's users Megan test.py. This is really important if later in life you have like multiple files that you're using. It's nice because it tells you which file that you're having an error in. So like if you define a function in one file and then you use that file in a different file and the error is in the file in the file with the function, it'll tell you that. So that's nice. It also tells you the line number. So in this case, it was line 17. And then usually it'll like put whatever function or whatever line trigger the error. And then after that, it tells you the type of error. So in this case, it's a name error. And then it tells you the error message. So name A is not defined. So this one's nice because it's really easy to read. Basically, I didn't define what A is in this print statement. So I have to go back and define it or replace A with something else. Okay, any questions on this? Yeah.
That's where it is, but then it says print add a comma 3.
Mhm.
That's the command that you're using in your file, and they're identifying that. Right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's what's written in line 17. Sometimes it's syntax errors. It'll print that line, but it's in the previous line. So for most errors, it'll tell you the exact line where it ran into the error. Any other questions? Okay, so now we'll talk about ways to debug. So now you can read error messages. So now we'll talk about how to fix these bugs. So there are two types of ways we'll talk about. The first way is docstrings. Basically, in your function, they're really only useful in functions, but whenever you write a function, you can add these test cases, for example. So I have this function where I want to add two numbers, x and y. And if I plug in 2 and 3, I expect an output of 5. And if I add 1 and 5, I expect an output of 6. So that's basically what these docstrings are saying. And then after you put those is where you put the contents of your function. So these are basically test cases where you're telling Python, if I put these inputs into this function, it should output this. And if it doesn't, there's a problem. So these are really nice for all different kinds of functions, especially more difficult ones, because then you can clearly see like which cases are working and which cases don't. Also, if you're working with edge cases, like, I don't know, indexing through a list, and you want to make sure you're not going like out of bounds on either side. That's a good idea to use doc strings. And then to run the doc strings, you have to run this line in VS Code. So it's Python 3 minus m doc test and then your file name. I should have put file name, but this file name is test.py. Yeah. And then the second way is to use print statements. So this one is nicer in cases where you're not really writing in a function, and or if you're doing a loop and you want to make sure like you're adding the right things or you're doing the loop properly, print statements are really nice. Basically, you just write print and you want to write whatever you're looking for. So you can show different variable values throughout the program. That's the most useful case. I know when I do stuff, I always have to look at different values if it looks weird or if like a graph looks weird or things like that. Also, just like a side note, this is not always the best option, just because it's not like a standard, but we won't really show you how to use a debugger in VS Code. It's a little bit advanced. So we'd rather you guys use print statements. And I still use print statements, so I don't think there's anything wrong with them. Yeah. So in this example, you don't really have to understand what's going on here, but basically I wrote a loop to find the factorial of a number. And my problem here is that it returns 0 instead of the factorial. So if the factorial loop of 3, it should output 6 because 3 times 2 times 1 is 6. In my case, it's not doing that. So what I do is I print the current value of I and then see if maybe I goes to 0 or not. And if that's true, then, oh, I need to change my indices here. Okay, let's look at these in VS Code. So everyone open a VS Code file. Can you guys see that in the back? Okay. Okay, so we'll look at our first case with using doc tests. So I'm just going to make the add function I wrote before. Oops. And then I'm just going to write something wrong so you guys can see. So we're going to return x minus y. And then we're going to put our doc tests. So I think I put, so we want to put these 3 arrows to signify that, okay, this is a line that I want Python to run. And then in the following line, you write whatever output you want. So we want Python to run this, and we're just going to put 2 and 3. I think that's what I put before. And our expected output should be 5 if we're adding 2 numbers. And then let's add another one. I think I put 1 and 5. And our expected output should be 6. Obviously, this isn't going to work because I did x minus y, but I just want you guys to see what it'll look like when we output. And I'll give you guys a couple minutes to write this down. These quotes? Yeah, so these are to signify that we're writing doc tests. So basically, when you have these 3 quotes, it means, okay, we're gonna write a doc test. It also means that you're writing a multi-line comment. So it allows you to make a comment that's more than 1 line too. But these arrows are, I think these 3 arrows basically signify, okay, this is a doc test. Okay, let's try running this using the doc test. Uh, uh, and then open a terminal. Okay, so the line we're gonna run to run the doc test is Python 3 -m doc test and then your file name. So mine is debugging demo. Okay, let's run this. Oh no. Oh, there are 2 of them, guys. I think it's just this. Okay, yeah. So if you make sure to write the correct file name, it should give you some errors. So if you scroll to the top, say file debugging demo, and then line 3. So our line 3 is our doc test. So failed example, an exception raised. And then in this case, what's wrong? Add is not defined. Actually, let me rename this. I have a different. I have too many of these. Okay, this one is better. So, yeah, if you write the correct name and make sure it's not a previous file name, make sure it's unique, then you should get this. It'll say it's a failed example. and then it'll tell you what example failed, and then it'll tell you the expected output, and it'll tell you what you got instead. So when we add 2 and 3, we're expected to get 5, but we got -1, and that's because I put x minus y, so it did 2 minus 3 instead. And then it tells you again the second example that failed, and also tells you the line number, which is nice too. So it tells you, okay, this example failed. We were expected to get a 6, and we got -4 instead. And that's because it did 1 minus 5. And then at the end, it tells you like more of a TLDR. 2 out of the 2 test cases failed, so they're like 2 failures. So if we fix this so that it works, it should say something like all test cases passed. Or it doesn't say anything because it all worked. Okay, any questions before we talk about print statements?
So if you actually want to run your like function in this case, you have to delete all that dot test like syntax, right?
I don't think so. Let me see. Let me add something. Just say add 5 and 6. No, it still works. So it'll still output. Yeah. Okay. Did you save the file? Okay, and then let me go take a look.
It's not. Okay, so I'm I renamed it. In my, like, in my management. It could fit. Yes, okay. And it should be one to get. And then also these. Yeah. Well, because it's nothing very loud. And then it replaces it with See, what I just did is I removed them with the new name and then deleted them. And then I mean, yeah.
Okay, let's talk about print statements now. So let's just make that function I made earlier, fact loop. And what did I put? So this is what I had before. All right, so this is what I had before. So I made my function and I set a total equal to 1. And then for every number in our range of numbers, so like if n is 3, our range is going to be 1, 2, 3. We want to we want to times the total by that value. So that'll give us our factorial, and then we're going to return the total. And let's just make one doc test. You should get 6 if we take the factorial of 3. So, can you guys see this in the back still? Okay. But like I said earlier, this one output 0. So, just like a spoiler alert, does anyone know why this output 0? Any ideas?
Index starts at 0.
So whenever you take a range, everything starts in 0. So whenever we take a range of a number, it's going to do 0 up until the number right before n. So in this case, fact loop of 3, our range of 3 is going to be 0, 1, 2. So I know I said earlier 1, 2, 3, but that was to stump you guys. So range is going to be 0 until the number before. So that's why this outputs is 0. But let's see what our doc test says. Actually, no, we're not doing doc tests for this question. We're talking about print statements. So let's just say, so if I run this, I have to print it. Yeah, I get 0. So if you weren't able to look at it and see that, oh, our range is wrong, a good idea is always to like just print what your I is if you're not sure. Just to make sure that like you're not getting 0 or you're not including a number that you don't want to include. So yeah, like if I wasn't sure, I would print I and see what happens. So if we run this now, okay, 11 was what I printed from the previous function. So if you look at what I is, it starts at 0 and then goes to 1, 2, and then 0 was what our print statement was, what my print statement was. So just based off this, oh, we see I starts at 0. So then when we run this line, total times equals I, we're timesing the total by 0. And that's why our output is 0. That's one way print statements are nice, just so you can see different variable values, especially in longer files of code. Any questions before we move on? Yeah. Oh, so this range was off. So because we want to start from the number n and then stop at 1, we'll do our range. Or does anyone have any ideas how to fix this? So our range starts at 1 and ends at n. Yeah. Yeah. So does everyone agree with this answer? Yeah, you should do n plus 1. As if we did 1 to n, it would do 1 up until the number right before n. Oops. Yeah, so do n plus 1, we include n. Yeah.
What is n? Like, we haven't defined an n. Is that?
So n is our input value. Yeah, so we're saying for any number, and then we just call it n to represent any number we want to take.
For the function one is one.
So if I put like n is equal to 5 here, this is not the same n as in here. So when we put input parameters into a function, we're saying like for some arbitrary value, and we'll call this n, or like in this function, for some arbitrary x and y values, we want to add these values together as long as they're addable. So like if they're integers or floats, things you can add together. So yeah, same thing here. So an n defined outside and an n as a parameter are two different things. And Any other questions? Yeah.
So at the bottom, like, example, three,
Mm,
that's your defined. Right?
yes.
Oh,
Yeah, I'm telling when you call a function and you input some values into the parameters, you're telling Python, okay, so in my function, I defined 3 as n. So I want 3 to act as n in our function. It's like it's a very similar idea to a math function, like x cubed, for example. Like in this case, um, x and n are the same thing. You can plug in numbers for x. Okay. So we'll talk about some common errors that you'll experience. I think the most common one is syntax error. Basically means that you made a syntax mistake. So like you're missing a parentheses or a colon. And we've seen that before in one of our poll questions. So here's one example. So I make a subtract function and it returns x and y, x minus y, but there's an error here. And just like a spoiler alert, it is a syntax error. So can anyone tell me what the error is here? Yeah. Yeah. So whenever we write a function or a loop, we always need to have a colon at the end of our defining statement. Otherwise, it creates a syntax error. And also, this is the type of error where it'll tell you that it's in this line when it in fact is in this line. Another error is type error. Basically, you're passing in the wrong number arguments. You're passing in the wrong type of arguments, or you're making a function call with a variable that's not a function. So here are some examples. This first one is when you're passing in the wrong number of arguments. So this function asks for 2 parameters, and we only pass in 1 here. So it's going to say this is a type error. There is, it asks for 2 arguments, but 1 was passed, or something like that. Also, if you put 3, for example, it'd be like, oh, it asks for 2, but you passed in 3, something like that. I run into that a couple of times when we talk about another data type later. You'll see that too many times. Another one was passing in a string as one of the parameters. And in this case, like Python won't automatically notice. It'll only notice in this line because you can't add a number and a string together. So it's gonna say like, oh, in this line, you're adding a number and a string. Like you can't do that. Even though like when it runs this line here specifically, it won't really notice because Python is not like some other languages. And then lastly, another example is that we define some variable and we set it equal to a value. It doesn't have to be an integer, it could be any value. It's just a variable in this case. And then we're calling it like a function. So we're saying like num and like we're inputting a value into there. We can't do that because this isn't a function. You can only call it as a function if it is a function. Another error is name error. You might see this a lot too. It's just that you wrote a variable that isn't defined. So if there is no code before this and I just had this line, we're defining a equal to 3 plus x, but we didn't find x up here. So it'll be like, oh, name error, x is not defined. These ones are pretty easy to fix though, because it's very clearly defined or really clearly stated what the error is. And then this one, I've shown you guys so many times already, index error. Basically, if you index into any kind of sequence and the number is like greater than the length it is. So in this case, our string is hello, and I index into the 6th position, but there is no 6th position. So it'll give an index error. Okay, any questions on the types of errors we've gone through so far? This is not all the errors. There's an exhaustive list that we won't go through, but we'll give you a link to all the different kinds of errors. These are just some common ones. Okay, we'll talk about how to mitigate bugs now. Make sure your spelling is correct. This is actually a very common problem. You're typing fast and you accidentally misspell something. That'll give you like a name error, for example. Make sure you close your parentheses and quotes. I know sometimes if you're like having multiple, there are so many parentheses in your like line, it can be really easy to mess up the number of parentheses. So just be careful and like look through those very carefully. I made this mistake recently and it was really, really annoying. Please don't mistake the single equal sign for double equals because it'll take like 3 hours off your life for no reason. Yeah, just don't make this mistake. They're very two different things and they will and it's very hard to notice because it doesn't give you an error. It'll just give you an unexpected output, the incorrect output when everything looks right. So make sure really pay attention to that. Check for infinite loops. This is very true for like while loops. Make sure that whatever value you're iterating over, or you're changing your conditional value and all of that. Off by 1 errors. So like your index, your range in like a for loop is incorrect. Like in our previous example where we did 0, 1, 2 instead of 1, 2, 3. Those are very common, especially when you're first starting out. I made those errors a lot when I took this class. But those ones are also kind of hard to see because they produce an output that you don't really notice or you don't expect. Another thing is to use comments to explain what you're doing, what certain lines are doing, just so that when you go back to a question after a couple of days, you can really understand what you're doing. I'm really bad at writing comments, so oftentimes when I write some code and I'm like frustrated and I come back the next day or the next couple of days, I don't even know what I wrote. So please make sure you use comments or start doing them now so you get into the habit of it. Because then it's a lot easier for you to read and other people to read. Also name variables based on what they represent. I try to do that for examples and demos and stuff. Sometimes I get lazy, but make sure you're naming variables so that it's easy to understand. A lot of the times, if that's not the case, it can cause errors and you'll also be confused. You're like, what is this? And this happened to a lot of students last semester during their projects, where they'll be like doing things. I'm like, what are you doing here? What does variable mean? All of that. So it can get really confusing. We didn't get to talk about unexpected outputs, but if you do want to look at that, I think it's available in last semester's recording for this lecture. Have a nice day, guys.